Hello everyone, welcome to the Kazi Maisha playlist of my YouTube channel. So this video is the first of two videos in which I want to address the recent announcement coming from the Boris Johnson government through the UK High Commission, announcing to Kenyans that uh, the UK will be offering work permits to Kenyans with skills but who have no degrees. Of course, anyone would expect, I read a lot of mischief here, but it's not coming from nowhere. So in this video, I'm going to talk about employment, what employment actually is. And then in the next video, I will address the specific issues that I take with the Boris Johnson's government announcement. So, karibuni sana. I encourage you to go back to my first and second videos in the Kazi ni Maisha series where I talk about work as dignity, creativity, and love. But in this video, I'm going to talk more about the process of work. Work is a process of conversion where we convert something from one thing to another, which will be used by human beings. So let's take, for example, the sukuma wiki you eat in the evening. That sukuma wiki was planted by someone who waited for it to grow, who either watered it or irrigated it or whatever they did. And then once the sukuma wiki had grown, they cut it. Then the sukuma wiki was taken to the market, and then from the market somebody sold it, and then you bought it, and then you went home, you cut it, you cooked it, and that's why it is on your plate. So all this process from the planting to the cooking to when you finally have sukuma wiki on your plate to eat has taken work. So that's what work does. It converts the soil to the sukuma wiki on your plate by using both natural processes and, of course, human labor to convert it from a plant in the shamba to something that you're eating. So we do this all the time. We convert one thing to another. But I also want to remind you, and this is something I've talked about in the previous videos, that work is also maintenance because you're converting things or situations or environments. So, for example, you convert a dirty room to a clean one, or you teach somebody from who has no skills in a certain thing to have a skill, or you have medical workers who take care of the sick until they become healthy. So work is not only about a product, it's also about maintenance. So this process of work in a normal human and free society is dignifying, it's creative, and it's a labor of love. Like I said, when you don't care for the people who you're working for, then you won't even do the work properly. But in the previous videos, I have also said that the global system which the world currently operates under divides people into two groups. There are those who work and who get dignity, creativity, and love from work. And there are those who are anti-human who do not work and yet they expect to benefit from the work of others. So how do they do this? They do it by using force and violence to grab and fence off natural resources, human resources, and even public works. But even then, they cannot become wealthy unless somebody still does the work. Remember, I said even if an aristocrat has a large piece of land, for that land to produce the sukuma wiki to sell, it has to be planted, it has to be weeded, it has to be harvested and cut and transported. And they are not going to do the work because that's not what they do. Then they don't work. They are too posh. So they need people to work for them. And honestly, if they could make you work without paying, they would be very happy. You just get people to come work, you tell them to do the Sukuma Wiki and everything, and if and then go away and not care, and then you can sell the Sukuma Wiki at 100% profit without having touched a thing. Um, but that is not possible because human beings refused, and they have been refusing for the last many centuries. So, how do they get rich? They get rich through profit. Now, I don't know what you might have been told in your economics classes, but for this video, I'm going to talk about profit as the surplus after deductions. So, what a land grabber will do is that they'll put you to work and tell you that they'll pay you a certain amount, and whatever surplus they make, he keeps. So actually, these aristocrats who don't think that work is for them, who think they are too posh to work, they still need our work. They need our dignity and our creativity and our expression of love, but without giving it back to us. Now we come to the basic argument of this video, which is that we are forced to be employed. It is not a choice. Why do I say that? I'm going to give 5 reasons why I think employment is not a choice. The first thing that makes employment inevitable is money. Money is the main medium of exchange in Kenya, and even the central bank calls it the legal tender. What is money for? Money is the way in which we convert our labor into other goods and services. Take, for example, a teacher. A teacher needs to eat, needs to pay rent, needs to buy clothes and get clothes and other such things. So for them to be able to get those other things they need their teaching to be converted into money, and then that money is used to go and buy those other necessities that they need. The problem with money is that it is owned and controlled by the people who also grab resources. So basically, what happens is that the people who don't work and who provide the legal tender for exchange also determine what you can be paid for and what you can't be paid for. And that is why you find, for example, many people who do work like artists not being paid because the people in charge of money have refused to allow the arts to be something that people are paid for. And the way to protect ourselves from this vicious system for the time being until we find a new economic system is maybe I'm suggesting creating chamas for barter trade. So, for example, you can have a chama with people from different professions, and you agree that you will be offering services in exchange for other goods and services. So, for example, I as a teacher, I can agree with a doctor, a fundi, a watchman, or anyone else that I will teach their kids, and in payment they give me those services which they provide. This is something we can do until we figure out how to make this system more just. Another thing that forces us to look for employment is unemployment. The irony. Unemployment is by design. It is necessary for many people to be unemployed because that is how employers blackmail people to work for them on any condition necessary. So all these temporary jobs, the ones which they call, for example, part-time for teachers, or locum, or internships, or even what the Uber drivers do, all these are temporary forms of employment where employers make money from your work, but they don't give you benefits like housing or a permanent pay, but they expect you to work as if you are secure and that you are not worried about what will happen to you the next month. And when they do this to us, they make us so insecure. They It means that we work for them at any cost because we are afraid that we will not get another job if we don't stick with this one. So unemployment is necessary to push the few people who are unemployed to work more and more for less and less, for fear that they might lose their jobs. Because if they complain, they'll be told, if you don't like it, go somewhere else. Another way in which we are forced to be unemployed is through prison. And there are two types of imprisonment that force us to look for employment. First is the obvious, the one of the cops putting handcuffs and taking you to jail. Recently, the government instituted the prison enterprise system, which is a system where companies will pay money to the prisons and the prisoners will go and work for those companies. And those prisoners will work at little or no pay because they are forced, because they are living in a prison and being guarded by people employed by the state to fukuza them. So the companies will make money from those prisons. And this is very dangerous for our freedom, because even with when you add the Huduma number, it means that there's an incentive to arrest more and more Kenyans. And when the Huduma number comes, it will be even easier to imprison people, because uh, the number can be used to trace you anywhere in the country. And they even say that you cannot transact or get a service if you don't have an Huduma number. And once your name is on the system as owing a debt or not having done whatever, you go to prison and you work at the way Joseph worked for Pharaoh for 7 years. So no, it wasn't Joseph. It was Jacob. So you'll be forced to work at little or no pay through the force of the prison system. And again, I encourage you to watch the movie by Ava DuVernay, which is called The 13th, to see how this system works. And I'm sure they got it from the US. The other prison that will be used is debt. And this is being used on university students, for example. They are forced to get HELB loans to pay for their education, and they are expected to pay those loans immediately they finish, whether they have an income or not. And if they do not pay, they will be put on the CRB, which means that debt collectors can come after them. So this forces university students to seek any kind of employment necessary so that they can pay off the debt. And this makes them vulnerable to exploitation, because employers can tell them, well, if you want the money to pay back your debt, you will have to work on the terms that we are giving you. And like I said, when so many people are unemployed, the other incentive is to just stay put, because you know that it's very hard to get a job. Then the fourth thing that keeps us looking for employment is these evil stories that private sector and the government tell about us. For example, this story of useless graduates who have no skills is just not true, and this is why I keep complaining about those stories. Those stories are meant to make us feel very small. They are meant to assault our dignity, so that when we get a job, we already go there feeling unqualified and unworthy of being in that job, and then the employer can exploit us as much as they want. So there's nothing like that about graduates being so unskilled that they are not worth employing. That's a lie which is told to make us desperate and grateful for any kind of employment that we get. The other thing that is said is that people who are unskilled, the problem with people who are graduates is that they don't want to do work that is unskilled. That's another lie, and that's part of the lie that the British government is telling its own citizens. So it's not only the Kenya government which is doing these bad manners. Even in Britain, the British are being told that they don't want to do the work, and that's why immigrants must come and do their work, because immigrants don't mind the lower pay. But I'm going to talk about that a little more in the next video. And the final thing that makes us forced to be employed is regulation. For example, teachers must abide by certain regulations provided by the government. That means that I cannot decide that I'm going to call kids to sort of my compound and say I'm going to teach them and be paid for it, because if I do that, the government will come for me and say that I don't have a permit. And for that permit, I have to pay. So every profession is regulated like that. And there are even some professions or some types of businesses where you need to hire certain people before you're allowed to start the business, because you need so and so to show that you are qualified for the business. So these regulations rig the economy so that it's only the people who have more money who are able to start businesses. So it's just not true that employment is a choice. There are all these things that are conspiring against people that force them to have to look for work if they are to put food on the table. Now, and that means that more employment or creating more jobs is not the solution. What we have to do is to attack the systems that make us have to look for work. We have to ask what kind of regulations are being put in place and who is demanding them. What are these licenses that we are being made to buy, and who is benefiting from these licenses? Also, another thing which I keep saying is that we need social services to be paid for directly by our taxes rather than us paying for them. For example, if we had free public education and free public healthcare, we would not be worried about trying to start a business, because we would know even if we have children, they will not suffer from lack of vaccines or lack of medicine or lack of education, because those are already provided by the state. So we need these universal services if the government is really serious about us creating our own jobs. But of course, they're not serious. They're just saying as a way to make us feel guilty for looking for employment. So, how are the people who do not work but who benefit from our work getting away with this evil and exploitative system? Well, just look at what we are taught in the schools. Economics is taught about prices and products, but we are not taught a history of labor. Do we know the human cost of slavery and what it was like to work in a plantation, about the torture, about being unable to have a family, about children being sold to other plantations? Do we know that history? Do we know the human cost of the Industrial Revolution? The fact that the industrialists were using materials grown through slavery or sharecropping. The fact that workers were working for 16 hours under very inhuman and filthy conditions, often getting sick. In Britain, the British put their workers in workhouses that were basically systems of it was a prison system. Do we know this history? Do we know the history of Europeans, including the British, who had children working in factories, who used to lose their limbs because their young fingers were working on machines? Do we know this history? Have we ever been told that the first fights of our people against the colonial system was over forced labor? That people like Harry Thuku were fighting over work, not over government, sijui who is MP, sijui how many votes. They were fighting over work. Do we know that Mekatilili was imprisoned by the British, banished, because she led the resistance against being forced to work for taxes? What do we know about our history about work? Do we also know that in 1938, the Wakamba had a 6-month sit-in to protest against being forced to give their cattle to a businessman for slaughter, and that the reason why the British were telling them to destock was not because of the environment, but because they wanted to force people to enter the economy of working for cash? All these stories about our struggles are not told. We are told only about the culture and the oathing and the political uh, parties, but we are not told about how people were being forced to work and how they were refusing to work, and that was the major part of our struggle against colonialism. The other thing is that our media keeps us completely ignorant of the human cost of our work. Just look at business news. I challenge you, look for the business pages in the newspaper or listen to business news in the evening. Do you ever hear any reports about workers? I think it was yesterday or about 2 days ago. I was listening to a story in business news about flower workers complaining about being laid off. And after showing like 2, 3 minutes of the flower workers complaining about being laid off, they hosted the head of the flower council for about an hour, telling us how they are so good and they are taking care of the workers and they are doing their best. But we didn't get to hear what it is the workers do. So just this is how the media and the education system prevent us from asking questions about the human cost of the wealth that is produced and who it goes to. So basically, I'm coming back to one of the things I keep saying in my videos. We must tell our stories because the real story of Kenya is the story of our work. It's the story of the farmers who go through hoops to grow our food and then are given regulations that are impossible to meet. It's about the mamambogas who bring that food to the market, who are chased away by Kajo askaris. It's about the fundis of our homes and our furniture who sometimes do the work and don't even get paid for it. It's about the teachers who teach our children. It's about the medical workers. It's about the cleaners, the environmentalists, all these people who are doing work are not either not being paid or are being mistreated. And then the people we give glory for the work that all these other guys do are the CEOs who tell us about boys club and expensive alcohol, are the people who have got access to government to get themselves title deeds over land. So we must tell our stories. We must tell our stories about the work that we did. And remember what Martin Luther King said to those high school students many years ago. You must be proud of the work you do. You must be a somebody. Even if you laid one stone in a building, even if you taught one kid, you have to tell your story. We have to tell our stories of the work that we did so that as we tell the stories of our work, we become creative enough to look for another system where our work is an expression of our dignity, our creativity, and our solidarity and love for one another.